I'm Mark Boris, and this is Straight Talk.
After 10 years of podcasting and over 1,000 conversations, it's been a hell of a ride. And I've decided it's time to, take everything to the next level. I've spoken to prime ministers, top business leaders, world-class operators, and some of the sharpest minds in tech and property. I speak to the best in the business. I make it my business to do that. But there's a lot behind the scenes that no one sees, and I want you to be part of it. That's why my team and I are launching Mentor Plus. Now, it's a new website platform designed to bring you the best business insights and connect a community of like-minded people who are serious about growing in their business and in their career and in life. So we're going to launch a new weekly solo podcast featuring Q&A, where I'll dive deep into the business. I'm going to dive into life's questions and answer everything you want. But that's just the beginning. Mentor Plus members will also get access to weekly blogs from me and my team, behind-the-scenes content, a private community group chat, be the first to know what's next on my podcast, and the opportunity to ask our podcast guests questions. There's going to be business resources on this website. There's exclusive events and experiences right here at Mentor Studios. And if you're obsessed with growth, just like me and the team are here, hit the link in the bio, join the waitlist, and I'll see you inside. Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. Welcome to Straight Talk, mate.
Thanks for having me on your show, Mark. It's good to be here.
Most welcome. Mate, just quickly today, I mean, this show will go out in a couple of days, but today you've been doing presses. Massive reaction to the Trump tariffs, the Chinese tariffs back to the USA. What's happening today, and how do you feel about it as a treasurer of the country?
Yeah. Well, a huge day in the economy today, really three things at once. The markets are going berserk because of the tariff decision. We've released some of the economic numbers around the budget and the economy, and we've also put out some modelling about what the tariffs mean for us, or what the Treasury expects the tariffs to mean for us. So it's been a huge day, but I think most consequentially, markets are going nuts, and so at the time we're speaking, on kind of early-ish or mid-Monday afternoon, our market's down about 4%. The Americans were down about 6% on Friday. Hong Kong was down 9% because they've been closed a bit longer. And so
today, 9%.
9% today, but they've been closed for 4 days rather than 2. So right. They had all of it in one hit. And so what all of that means basically is that the world's markets are reacting very, very badly to the announcement from President Trump.
And the China's response doesn't help, because that's had, China's response to the US, they sound like let's call it a tariff war for the moment, just for want of a better term. That sort of doesn't augur well for China as an economy, and that reflects back onto us. And of course, our Aussie dollar has been flip-flopping around 59, 60, 61 in that territory. That's historically low.
Yeah.
Probably 10 years.
It is very low, and you're bang on, obviously. What matters, the tariff announcement by President Trump matters a lot, but in terms of the impact on the economy, it's also the kind of escalation, the Chinese escalation and elsewhere. And that's hard to get a handle on because a lot of that's still to play out. But from an Australian point of view, we are more worried about the impact on the Chinese economy than we are worried about the impact on the American economy. Only about 5% of our exports go to the USA, but a much bigger chunk go to China. And so exactly what you said, our dollar is being hit because our dollar is often treated as a bit of a proxy for how people are seeing China. And because people are worried about China, then our dollar becomes less valuable.
And maybe a little bit of silver lining out of all this, because I'd also heard you in the press say, if the Reserve Bank's ever had a good reason to start reducing interest rates in the May meeting, which I think is the 17th of May or somewhere around there, and off the back of, probably not even off the back of any new inflation data, probably don't have to worry about what's going on what comes out at the end of April. But just from an economy point of view, they're going to have to do something to look after our economy.
Yeah, what I actually said in that press conference is, and I mean it, I don't make predictions about interest rates. I don't preempt the decisions they take independently. You watch the Reserve Bank as closely as anyone, you know that treasurers don't make those kind of predictions. What I said in the press conference was the market is expecting a number of rate cuts this year, and they've started pricing that into their decisions. And you're right that the next meeting's in the middle of May. And some people in the market, some economists are expecting a bigger than normal interest rate cut. But I'd be very, very careful, as did my predecessor. Everyone in my job tries to be careful not to make those kind of predictions. People can see how the market's reacting. They can, closely follow the economists that they trust, and the economists and the market are expecting there to be more rate cuts this year.
So we might the last time I sort of experienced this sort of structural change, potential structural change, or definitely disruption like this, was probably the GFC period. What were you doing during the GFC period? Where was Jim Chalmers?
Yeah, so I was, for the first bit of it, I was the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Treasurer, Wayne Swan. That's when I first met you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became the Chief of Staff to the Treasurer. And so one of the upsides of that is when we're seeing this pretty extreme volatility in the economy, I've got some experience from this office in thinking through it and responding to it. And I think one of the unusual things about our economy, if you step back for a second, well, not unusual, but unusual in historical terms, is we've had now 4 big economic shocks in less than 2 decades. We had the GFC, we had COVID, we had the inflation spike after COVID, and now we've got these escalating trade tensions, which you described not unreasonably as a trade war. And so 4 big economic shocks in less than 2 decades.
Which is amazing.
It used to be that these big shocks were kind of punctuation points between long periods of calm, and now we're getting more and more frequent crises. And so my formative experience in terms of the job that I do now is actually thinking through and working through some of these sorts of issues in the GFC, a different kind of crisis, but a big challenge to the global economy with big implications for Australia, and that's what we're working through now.
Well, one of the things that is sort of similar back in the GFC period, at least at the beginning, was the share market reacted badly globally, but particularly here in Australia. People got quite nervous about their super. A lot of Australians saw their superannuation, which is largely invested in shares, go from one point down to another point very quickly. And everyone got very, very nervous. Yeah. Let's leave interest rates out. I mean, interest rates did go down quickly as a result of, most countries did this. But let's just push that aside. As you say, that's an RBA decision anyway. Markets will price in whatever they price in. But in terms of the Treasurer calming the nerves of Australians who have got money invested in their super, which, by the way, is one of your, favourite people, Paul Keating. One of the greatest policies that's ever been, I think, put out ever. Yeah, I'm not that sure about the industry funds who have sort of become much bigger than the banking system after that, but definitely on an individual Australian basis. Every single individual in this country is going to be better off, and the Australian economic person is going to be better off. Of course, we're not going to be forking out for people when they retire, hopefully. Not as much. Right. Not as much as in the US and other places.
Right, takes pressure off the pension.
So you've seen how Australians felt, and you were the Deputy Chief of Staff and then later on Chief of Staff during sort of around that period. What would you say to Aussies right now, apart from the fact that they've seen $85 billion get wiped off the ASX and probably the value of their super's gone down? What does the Treasurer say? What do you say to Aussies about this? What do we do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I understand that people are nervous about it. Of course they are. We've seen a very substantial drop in the share market just today. And a lot of superannuation is invested in shares around the world as well. And so it's not limited to what's happening here. And so first of all, I understand, particularly if you're closer to retirement, you're watching your balance very closely and very carefully. And so days like today are very troubling. I think the reassuring side of that, or two actually pieces of reassurance. First of all, in the last 3 years, there have been, I think, 28, give or take, 28 new record highs in the share market. And so in the last 3 years, people have done very, very well in their super. And the other thing I'd say is that as difficult as these global conditions are, as concerning as developments out of the US and China and elsewhere are, we are, if not the best placed country, we are among the best placed countries to deal with it. Our budget is in better nick than other countries. We've made a lot of progress on inflation. Our unemployment's very low. Our economic fundamentals are quite good here. And the credit for that belongs to the whole country. I'm not taking credit for that as a government. We share the credit for that. And so we've made all this progress the last few years, strengthening our budget, strengthening our economy, and that puts us in good stead for whatever the world's going to throw at us. So I think it's possible to be realistic about what's happening in the global economy, but optimistic about Australia's capacity to deal with it, confident but not complacent about what the coming months and years will bring.
Because Australia fared very well in the GFC. I mean, we suffered a little bit in the beginning, but we didn't really have that much damage because we didn't hold a subprime market. Similarly, we don't really export much to America. I mean, some people will be affected on what we export to the US, but that's not our biggest export market.
Yeah,
our biggest export market is China, Japan, and Korea. Yeah. By far, by country mile. Like it's so much bigger. We sort of fared quite well out of it. At the time, Wayne Swan brought in all sorts of things like deposit guarantees for guaranteeing your deposit with the banks. The banking system, because it was a banking failure period. We didn't fail in Australia, but that was sort of what was happening around the world. We brought in some government policies. But Australians love the fact that they got a lot of money in their super, but I think Australians, and this is an election period, make it even more
a layer of complexity,
a lot more complex, because you can't, and you're the Treasurer, you can't say anything, but say too many things because you don't want to be look like you're being advisory, but at the same time, you're a leader of our country, one of the leaders of our country. Up there, like you're probably the second most important person when it comes to the economy or the country relative to the economy. And the economy is the number one problem right now. We're not being attacked by anybody. We're not worried about the Minister for Defence. We're looking at the economy. Do you feel sometimes, I wish I could just say something more to Australians to just warm them up a little bit, just to say, guys, don't worry, we've got control of this. We're not control. We know what we're doing. We've been through it before. It'll be okay out the other side.
Yeah.
Especially given there's an election on. Do you ever get that feeling you just want to, Jim Chalmers wants to say what he really feels?
Well, I think I'm really fortunate because I decided when I got this job that I was going to try and always err on the side of frankness. And sometimes you can be too blunt, but I would rather be too blunt than the alternative. And so even in the course of today, the whole reason why the Treasury modelling about the impact on the economy from these tariffs, the whole reason that's been made public is because I made it public. I said we were going to update the modelling and I'll release it. And I made sure that my opponent was briefed on it and all of that because I think more information is almost always a good thing. And so I try and be blunt and frank about it. And it's true of this challenge from these tariffs, but also when talking about these cost of living pressures, you and I had that good exchange, I think, on social media about it because we haven't ever pretended that there aren't cost of living pressures. I think what matters is once you acknowledge that, you do something about it, and I think that we are. But we've tried to be upfront about that. We've not tried to sugarcoat what have been some difficult economic conditions the last 4 or 5 years, really the last 2 decades. And so to acknowledge that in a blunt and frank and upfront way, and then to try and explain to people what we're doing about it. And I think that's almost always the best way to go about it because you want to let people in on what you're grappling with. And especially when there are 50-50 calls. And the difference between the experience during the GFC, the experience that my predecessor Josh Frydenberg had during COVID, the experience we had in the global inflation spike and now, is the magnitude of these challenges are broadly similar, but the way that you respond to them are a bit different. And so to explain to the Australian people, this is what we're grappling with. In this case, it's a bit different to those other 3 economic shocks. In this case, what we need to do is make our economy more resilient, help our businesses find new markets in the world and especially in Asia, and also engage so that all of these countries impacted by these tariffs out of the US were more or less in the same boat. Nobody's uniquely impacted. The levels of tariffs are different, but we're all impacted. And so last night I spoke to the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, about how
is your opposite number.
My opposite number in the UK, and talking to her about how you're dealing with it. I'll be speaking with my colleagues and counterparts closer to home as well because this particular challenge to the global economy requires more resilience, more diverse markets, and more engagement. And so that's our strategy.
And collaboration?
Yeah, lots of that. I mean, especially, in our region, I was speaking to someone this morning about, the fact that we stabilised the relationship with China. That trading relationship's obviously very important to us. The ASEAN countries, we put so much effort into engaging in the region. Our region's the hope of the side when it comes to the global economy. We are so blessed to be part of the most important, most dynamic region in the world. And if the US wants to clamp down on people exporting into their markets, then I think a lot of the world, including us, is saying, well, we'll find different, better, more reliable markets if you don't want our stuff. And here is where, coming back to what you asked me before about what's the reassuring part of this, our employers, our workers, our exporters, our industries are world class. You think about the beef industry, for example. We've got the best beef in the world, right? And if there's part of the world that doesn't want to buy our beef or wants to put tariffs on our beef, then we'll sell it to other people who want to buy it. And so that gives me a bit of confidence as well. It's not like we are going to the world begging. We have critical minerals. We've got resources, we've got ag, we've got manufacturing, we've got services, we've got things we're adding value to. There are good reasons to be confident, not complacent, to be optimistic about Australia's future, despite this really serious turbulence that we're all going through now.
Could you believe it when it happened, when the election got called? Could you believe, my God, you're thinking, what's happened here?
When they announced the tariffs?
The PM calls the election, and the next next moment we turn around and the whole election announcement got overridden by the tariffs.
I wasn't surprised. The way that we describe them is they're not surprising, but they are seismic. And you had the steel and aluminium tariffs before the election was called, and then you had these kind of broader tariffs after the election was called. And obviously we've been engaging with the Americans on this for months. So not surprising that they went down this path necessarily, but seismic in terms of the impact on the global economy. And you can just see the way that markets have reacted is just one indication of how really the rules of the global economy are being rewritten by the Americans. And so everyone's trying to work out, how do we make the best of a bad situation? And that's what we're doing, because these supply chains around the world are changing now. And we've got a chance to work out how we can be, the best, most reliable parts of those new supply chains as the Americans rewrite the rules of the global economy. And so, again, you'd rather be us than almost anyone, if not anyone. But it's going to be difficult because the impact on global demand, the impact on the global economy is going to be substantial.
What do you think the Americans are trying to do? What's Trump's main game here? I mean, I might just add that newspapers say, what gets reported, I should say, is that Trump thinks it's unfair. Someone's charging him a tariff. He takes a view he can charge a tariff back. And that's sort of like tit for tat type stuff.
Yeah.
But what really do you think is really behind this? Why?
Well, I think I don't know if you've got some perspectives on this from the shared interest that you had for a while in the TV show, but I think the thing that appears to be driving it, and again, it sets us apart a little bit, is I think President Trump sees a trade deficit with another country as a problem that warrants his attention.
So that's a new situation where he is importing more of their stuff than he's exporting to them. Yeah,
and he sees that as a major economic problem. And so as the global economies become more and more integrated, he has seen these trade deficits that the Americans have with other countries like China as a big economic challenge that he wants to address. What makes us different is the Americans have a trade surplus with us. With a couple of exceptions, sort of the other day, a quarterly exception, but really since I think 1952, the Americans have run a trade surplus with us, and so we're different.
In other words, we drag more stuff from there to here than they take from us.
Yeah, and again, I think I said it before, but I don't think people really appreciate that 5% of our exports, a bit less actually, go to the US. The US is very important to us, very mutually beneficial economic relationship, but in terms of our exports, less than 5%. And they run a surplus with us, and so that makes us different. But I think that's the economic challenge he's trying to address.
It sounds very simple. It's had catastrophic structural changes at the moment, but it sounds very simple, very, very simple.
Well, I'm doing my best to work out their motivations. Obviously, only the administration knows exactly what they're trying to achieve here, but certainly the effect of what they have done has been dramatic. There are very credible people who are saying that this might cause a global recession.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't be immune from that. We still expect our economy to continue to grow. But obviously a trade-exposed economy like ours, in the context of a serious global downturn, we would be impacted by that and potentially quite seriously. But our central case, Treasury's best forecast of what they expect is that we'll continue to grow but a bit slower because of the way that demand in the global economy is expected to come off.
I had Chris Joy sitting here last week, and Chris said to me that either we could have an inflationary period or a deflationary period. He said probably it'll start off as a deflationary period because he said China will be probably sending a lot more stuff here. And by virtue of more supply, as a result of more supply, things could well get cheaper, which will solve your inflation problem straight away without even have to try. I mean, and by the way, there's a lot of mortgage holders in this country, a couple of million of them, who'd like to get that inflation problem solved straight away because it means that their high interest rate problem will get solved straight away.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we should acknowledge that inflation's come off a lot in the last few years. So
from December 22 for sure.
Yeah, it was 7.8 then.
Yep.
It's now 2.4. And so it's come off a lot. And the markets and economists were already expecting interest rate cuts this year. But this will have implications for inflation. It sort of swings and roundabouts. So Chris is right about the potential for cheaper imports. Say exports from the region that would have otherwise gone to the US might find their way to us, and that might bring the price down. Also, the oil price, I'm sure you've been watching, has come off a heap, sort of in the mid-60s, I think, the last time I looked. And so that has the potential to push petrol prices down as well. Petrol's a big part of inflation.
Because everyone uses it. It's heavily weighted.
Yeah. And so that is possible. The Treasury thinks the overall impact would be a very modest increase in prices, increase in inflation in our economy, but it is possible
over time.
Yeah, it's possible that those two things, petrol and the price of imports, helps out a little bit. There's a lot of complexity in that as well, the dollar and a whole bunch of other factors. But what Chris said about that is something that a lot of economists are grappling with.
Let's go back and let's know a little bit about Jim Chalmers. Probably James Chalmers, I'd say. Are you James?
Yeah, I am James. Yeah.
We won't hold against you because it's an election, but you are a Queenslander. Is correct?
I am very proud. Very proud Queenslander.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a place called Logan City.
Logan City.
Yeah.
Some great footballers, rugby league players come from.
Outstanding. Cameron Smith,
for one.
Yeah. Corey Parker.
Yep.
Josh Papali. Some wonderful, they're all actually from Logan Brothers, which is the best junior rugby league club in the world. But I grew up in Logan City, which is sort of between Brisbane and the Gold Coast.
Yep.
And it's the area I represent now. I represent the southern Brisbane suburbs and the northern half of Logan City. Born there, grew up there, raising my kids there. It's where I'm from. And
you still live there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I live about not even a K from the house I grew up in.
Wow.
And it's actually really important to me where I grew up because if I could have anything when I'm done, I want my community to be proud of me. I want them to think of me as their local member who happens to be the treasurer, not the treasurer who happens to be their local member, because I draw a lot of inspiration from the area.
So you're brothers, sisters?
I got two older sisters.
Two older sisters?
Yeah, two legends, one in Cairns, one back in Brisbane now. Terrific. Two terrific older sisters. My mum still lives in the house that we grew up in.
Mum and dad together or they?
No, mum and dad split when I was in my teens, sort of 13, 14. But both wonderful people and no dramas, but not together.
Yeah, not together. Well, that's 50% of the population.
Both of them remarried, lovely people.
So you grew up in the area, and Did you play footy or what was your deal?
I'm a basketball guy.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a basketball guy and a distance runner. But I'm an obsessive about basketball, and my little boy, my oldest 10-year-old, he is obsessive too. And so we spent a lot of time at a place called Logan Thunder, which is our local association. And that's in terms of playing and coaching, and I used to work at a basketball stadium, Southern Districts. That's kind of been my passion. But I follow rugby league closely, and I follow the AFL too.
And who's rugby league side?
Broncos, yeah, Broncos and Lions, and Logan Thunder and the Brisbane Bullets in the basketball.
My Roosters, we're playing you guys on Friday night. Second time in 6 weeks or something.
You had a tough one. I've heard a lot about your match on last weekend because you played the Prime Minister's team, and so
yes, I know.
He's shown me a few highlights on his phone.
No, don't need to gloat. It's okay. It's okay. One of the producers, our main producer, our executive producer over here, is a Mad South supporter too.
Right.
So we don't need to talk about that for the moment. By the way, I will say this. I think that pass by Latrell was a forward pass.
Well, that's the one that Albo was showing me on his phone. Before we gave a speech together on Sunday in Brisbane. And before we went on, he had something very urgent that he wanted to talk to me about, and it was actually to show me the trail pass 3 times on his phone.
Well, don't worry, it's been circulating everywhere. It's gone on the Roosters website. It's gone mental. But we'll peel back from that. Obviously, you're a Queensland supporter in the state of origin too.
Yeah.
But so you went to school in Logan City. What happened?
I went to school in a place called Mount Gravatt in the southern Brisbane suburbs.
Okay, yeah.
And I went to primary school in my local area and a little bit up the road to high school. Went to Catholic schools.
Yeah.
My dad's side of the family Catholic. So I had 12 years of Catholic schooling.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. So did I.
Yeah. And pretty local. But I think, whether it's the local sporting scene, whether it's there's parts of my electorate that have got their share of challenges. It's a tough area in lots of ways. I think growing up there and being able to represent it now, I just think that's a gift. And I'm not alone in the parliament representing where I grew up. There's a bunch of people, I'm sure, in that boat, but I consider myself especially fortunate because on election day you run into your mate's mum and you run into the families you grew up with, and you know the place like the back of your hand, and it really does. It gives you an advantage because you don't have to look far to find motivation.
Have you got a Teal candidate opposing you?
No, I feel like I've got everyone, but they line up to take on the treasurer. But I don't think I've got a Teal yet. That might change. We've got a few days left.
Green,
got a Green. Yeah, got a
Liberal.
Got a Liberal. Got a Trumpet. Got a Family First.
A Trumpet. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
the whole gang.
So you when you left school, when you're doing year 12 in Mount Gravatt, what were you thinking to yourself? What's Jim going to do? Ed, what's Jim going to do for his future? I mean, did you have someone say, "Come on, mate, I want you to be a lawyer, or I want you to be a banker, or I want you to go and do an economics course and join the Reserve Bank, or I want you to be a carpenter"? Yeah, especially in those areas, because I grew up in a similar area in Sydney, Punchbowl, and
Punchbowl, yeah,
and it was always more trade, be a trade, go become a plumber or a brickie or a builder or something, which is what I want to be. I want to become a brickie. It was my mother dragged me to university. She basically made me go to university. She actually dragged me and enrolled me. And what was Jim Chalmers thinking about at the time? And who did you turn to? You turned to mum, dad? Who talked to you?
Well, I think it's important to think or remember now or recall now. When I was a teenager, it was just me and mum. So my sisters moved out. My mum and dad split. And my mum used to work night shift every night. And so we came to an arrangement pretty early that we were going to look after each other, but I was going to be on my own a bit and she was going to be on her own a bit. And
as in year 12?
Really from about grade 9 or 10 for the rest of the way through school. And so I went off the rails a little bit when I was at school. Wasn't the best behaved kid for a while. And then I ran into this teacher who literally changed my life. And his name was Norbert Grulich. And we just lost Norbert about a year ago. We just passed on. He was almost 90. And Norbert was this huge mountain of a guy from Germany. And he came to Australia and he taught me modern history. And because I wasn't from a political family, I had no idea about politics. But I loved modern history, and he was my teacher. And he said to me at some point, he said to me, what do you want to do when you leave? And I said, I'm really interested in the world. Maybe I could work in kind of foreign affairs or something. I remember he saying to me, you could be the foreign affairs minister. And I didn't know, I genuinely, like grade 10 or 11, I didn't really know what that meant. We'd never had a political conversation at my house. And he believed in me when not a lot of people would have believed in me. And he was just a huge influence in my life. I stayed friends with him until we lost him last year. And without Norbert, I wouldn't have found this purpose. I don't know where I would be, but I wouldn't be here because he was the one. And when we knew that he was dying, I wrote him a letter saying, you've done this probably for a bunch of kids, but what he did for me, I'll never forget.
Wow. So that's cool. And he died last year?
Yeah, he was almost 90. And, we lost him. And I saw him a little bit before he passed away. And I can't convey to you what a wonderful guy he is. And he just had this superpower, which was to basically find kids that weren't living up to their potential and to inject them with a sense of belief. And really from there, I started looking around and thinking, there's a job apparently where I can care about my community, care about what's happening in the world, care about the economy, be a social worker, a lawyer, a journalist, all at once. And so he opened my eyes to something that I had not seen before or was not aware of before. And he used to give me extra things to read or to think about. I used to hang out with him after school sometimes, have deep and meaningful conversations about the future and the world and where we fit. And I just owe him so much. And you mentioned before Paul Keating. The whole reason I started reading books about politics was because of Norbert, and that's how I came to my appreciation for Paul Keating, because I used to go to the Logan City Library, and there's a big section on politics that wasn't the most
popular
wasn't
section.
The busiest aisle in the Logan City Library. But I found this book there by a guy called Michael Gordon, who's also passed, unfortunately, who used to be a press gallery journalist. He wrote a book about Paul Keating. And I took it home, still a teenager, and I took it home in grade 12, I think it was. And I remember reading this thing cover to cover in one sitting and then going back to the beginning and reading it again. And I just couldn't believe that there was a guy like Paul from the outer suburbs like me who had this kind of heart full of belief and the ability to kind of tell a story about the country and where people fit in it. And so Norbert helped me discover Paul. And then from that period on, I just read everything I could get my hands on.
About Paul?
About politics, but including Paul. Like there's a great book called The End of Certainty by Paul Kelly, the journalist from The Australian. I read that early, the Hawke memoirs, all this stuff. And so I used to stay up half the night. I was home alone, Mum would be doing night shift, and I'd stay up half the night with the lamp on, just reading everything I could. And I just couldn't believe that I had found this thing, and I wouldn't have found it without Norbert.
So we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s.
We're now talking about the mid-90s.
Mid-90s.
Yeah, mid-90s.
That's after Paul after he lost election as Prime Minister.
Well, I turned 18 the day that Paul lost the election.
As the Prime Minister. He was the Prime Minister at that point. Yeah,
so the 2nd of March 96, he lost office as the Prime Minister. I turned 18 that day and I pre-registered to vote. So my first vote was my birthday, and it was the day that Paul lost the 96 election, which is pretty strange coincidence.
You know what's really interesting about that period, 1996, just by memory, is that 1996 was the year that the Reserve Bank introduced the 2 to 3% inflation range.
Right, the inflation targeting. Yeah.
That's it, 1996. And bearing in mind, we just come off ridiculously high inflation period during Bob Hawke's period, great Prime Minister Bob Hawke, and during Paul's period as well.
Mm-hmm.
we had high inflation, but they decided that's when they decided that 2 to 3% was going to be the range for inflation, which, by the way, we sat in that inflation range on average, sometimes above, sometimes below, right up into 2020 or something like that, just before COVID.
Right.
It was pretty good. It was 25 years, nearly 26 years of that 2 to 3% RBA range. Yeah. And it was in that period, 1996. And of course, that was a tough period. I mean, it was a very tough period for everybody at that period. And we've just been through something similar. I mean, the interest rates never got as high, but relative to the amount of money we've borrowed as Australians and as a country, it's been the same outcome. It's been a pretty tough period, these high interest rates. And it's interesting that you should say that was the first time you were able to vote in 1996.
That day.
As Treasurer, saying that today as Treasurer. And I do recall at the time Mclachlan was a Treasurer. Mclachlan was the RBA Governor, I should say. And when Paul was the Treasurer and or Prime Minister, I used to think to myself, because I'm a lot older than you, and I used to think, and Paul, by the way, is a few years older than me, but he was I went to the school in Bankstown that he went to.
De La Salle?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. I went to the same school. And
is there a statue?
Of him?
Of you?
No, not of me, mate. Definitely not of me. Similar to yourself, I was a bit wayward.
Right.
I don't know if it's the same reasons, but I was a bit wayward too. But fortunately, I'm similar to you. It's not about me, it's about you. But I did meet a person, one of the brothers at the school I was at, Catholic school, who actually changed my life. And he changed my life just by guidance.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Like how he is 93 or 4 at the moment, still alive. But I'll never forget it. Never forget it. Similar to yourself when
do you tell him? Do you ring him?
Absolutely.
And tell him?
Yeah. We had our scary. We had 2 years ago. We had our 50th anniversary of Year 12 at the Reesby Workers, and he came. He flew up from Melbourne to come to that. And the only reason I went because I knew he was coming, and all the boys. I was going to say the kids, but all the fellas.
Hope you shouted the bar, Mark. You've done well for
No,
yourself.
but Darryl Mellum did.
Oh, right.
I was in Darryl's class.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Yeah. And we're at the Reesby Workers. No, Darryl sorted the whole thing.
He knows that place pretty well.
He does. No, we're good mates, me and Darryl. So but it's interesting that people can have an influence on people like that, and that influence stays with you for the rest of your life. Do you think that you use the word care on about 5 different sentences, what you care about? Is that a big factor in Jim Chalmers' life in terms of everything you do? Forget about family. Just put aside family. Yeah. I'm talking about political life. Yeah. That caring side of you. Because it's what Anthony Albanese said, exactly the same things, differently.
Yeah.
But he's the same sort of character.
Yeah.
It seems to me.
Yeah. Well, think about his upbringing. I think it says something pretty good about Australia that you can have Anthony from his background, me from Logan City, in those 2 jobs. And I think that does, of course, that helps form the way you think about the world. You think about Paul Keating's mentor, a controversial guy called Jack Lang, former Premier of this state. I think he said to him at some point, if you have the ability to speak up for other people, then you have a responsibility to speak up for other people. And that's how I'm sure that's how Anthony sees his role and how I see mine as well. And you think about the best thing about Australia is that we've got this sense of mobility. We don't have these kind of it is still possible in Australia in a way that it's not possible in every country for someone to come from nothing to make something of themselves. And that's probably the thing I care about most. This idea that in a good country like ours, people from Logan City or other areas like Logan City can be successful, that there's no kind of barrier to that. That's probably the thing I care about the most. And of course, the way we grew up, Anthony, yourself, me, of course that shapes you. And the beautiful thing about the brother that looked out for you and Norbert who looked out for me is sometimes that ambition needs a bit of structure. And especially if you're not from, a family where these sorts of things are discussed at the dinner table
or
and
just
debated.
Natural consequences of how you grew up.
Yeah. You want someone to help you give a bit of structure to that. And that's what great teachers can do and great mentors can do. And one of the things I've noticed in the business community, and you would have noticed it too, is this sense of mentoring's become a really wonderful kind of I'm sure you have people who rely heavily on you for your advice. That's become a really good thing because giving structure to that ambition is important.
I think that's a really good point you made before. If you have the ability, you have the responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, if you have the ability to do something, then you got to pay that forward.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't want to get too weird about it, but like if it's God given or something, you have a gift that you maybe others don't have, and then you have a responsibility to use it in a way that's good for everyone.
Right.
And that's your philosophy then. I'm getting it.
Yeah.
So finished school. Did you attend university?
Yeah, went to Griffith University in Brisbane.
Yeah, and what did you study there?
I actually ended up doing a politics degree, but it's in the commerce school. So I did a major in public policy and a lot of international relations, a lot of politics. It was kind of a new degree, so a lot of mixing and matching. So I did effectively an arts degree in government, but then I did my honours year was in the commerce school. And then I went and worked for a bit in the Queensland Public Service, and then I went and did a PhD at the Australian National University in Canberra.
And I probably well know, but your PhD featured largely Paul Keating.
Yeah.
And why did you pick that?
I became obsessed with this idea of leadership in the Australian context. You know, and I found, there's this whole, not to kind of get into it in a kind of a academic way, but there's this whole literature about how prime ministers exercise their power, and I became very fascinated by that, interested in that, and so I used Paul as a way of telling a story about what the Australian prime ministership looks like. But I went to the ANU to do the PhD because I wanted to work at Griffith University. I wanted to teach there. And the best way often is to not do everything at the one university. And so they advised me, they said, if you want to come back here, get your PhD from somewhere else and try and come back. But I knew pretty quickly in my PhD, I was doing it full time briefly. And then I decided I wanted to work and finish it part time. I knew that wasn't, that I wanted to be involved in exercising power, not just writing about it. The first time I met Paul Keating was to talk to him about my thesis, and he said to me, I remember the very first time I ever met him, he said, you should spend your time exercising power rather than thinking about it. And I still finished the PhD, and I'm glad that I did. It was a wonderful experience, but I knew that I wanted to do a job like the job I'm doing now.
Right now.
Yeah.
And we talked earlier before about you being the Deputy Chief of Staff and the Chief of Staff to the Treasurer at the time. Maybe you explain what that job actually is, because most people don't know what that means. Yeah,
so it's running a big office for the Treasurer and doing a lot of the interacting with the stakeholders, the regulators, the Treasury Department. And so a job that combines some management, some strategy, a lot of stakeholders. And when I came into this job as Treasurer, I found that it was a real gift that I had spent so many years in and around the portfolio, because I knew how everything came together. I knew where the levers were. I knew what it was like to interact with a big Treasury Department and with all of the regulators and all the rest of it. And so it felt like a big advantage that I had. I don't think, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anyone's come into the job of being Treasurer having run a Treasurer's office before. And there's obviously a lot of commentary about the best kind of experience being the Treasurer, but I have found that experience to be really helpful.
I recall in about, I might have got the dates wrong, but it might have been about 2010, 12. It was during the period when Bill Shorten was when he lost the unlosable election to Scott Morrison, and Chris Bowen was the shadow minister for Treasury, and I think Chris Bowen was a treasurer for a very short period. Wasn't he? A couple of months, not very long.
Correct.
But then the Liberals got in, and then he stayed as shadow treasurer for a long
That's
time.
What happened. Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with Graham Richardson, who's, I might add, is one of your big fans. And Richard told me, he said, mate, there's a bloke in Queensland who I think will make a great, at the time, shadow treasurer, because the Liberals were in. And I said, well, what's his name? Tell me his name. I was having lunch with Richard, and he wouldn't tell me. But he raved on about you for ages. And of course, along comes young Jim Chalmers and becomes the treasurer of the country. And it's right to Richo's playbook, by the way. And I'm not saying that he manipulated the situation, but he does have a playbook, Richo. He's well known for it.
He knows his way around the place.
And Richo is close to Paul, or was close to Paul, and he is more to the right of politics of Labor Party. If we could sort of split Labor into, one side and the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you sit? Because Richo's backing you. Does that mean that you're on the right-hand side or the left-hand side?
I have come from the we would call it the moderate side.
The moderate side.
The centre.
Okay. Right's the wrong word.
But that's mattering less and less, I think, over time. And, people have said to me before, I ran into Richo and he said a kind thing about you. I appreciate that. In politics, having people vouch for you and say nice things for you.
Well, especially Richo, though, because he's not a suck. He'll say what he thinks.
Yeah. Yeah, so I appreciate that. And I'm sort of broadly from the part of the party that Richo and Paul Keating were from, but there aren't big kind of ideological differences between the groups in the Labor Party.
There are not,
really.
Did you say?
Not really. And so that stuff, that factional stuff, has mattered less and less. And some of my closest relationships in the parliamentary party, the person I work closely with is Katie Gallagher. I'm from the right, she's from the left, and so those factional differences aren't really material.
Yeah, but because I did want to talk to you about policy then and strategic moves by the Labor Party relative to policy. How does that get worked out? I know you guys vote differently to the way the Liberal Party vote within your own party. Generally speaking, you all decide whatever the majority decides is what the group that goes with.
Yep.
You don't sort of argue left and right. You just go with it.
Yeah.
How does like you guys have been announcing lots of policies this election period, which is normal. You have policies outside election period during the period when you guys are in government. How does strategic decisions get made? Is it from the PM or is there a group of people we don't ever get to see?
Yeah, well, it's largely the cabinet. So that's I think 24 people are in the cabinet. So the senior ministers and the PM. And different governments operate differently. Some of them are very top down, and some of them are a bit more inclusive. And Anthony deliberately, in ways that we appreciate, is at the kind of collegiate inclusive end. And so cabinet plays a big role. We've also got this group called the Expenditure Review Committee, which puts the budget together. So that's a pretty influential group.
But they're made up of Labor Party people?
Yeah, that's all out of the cabinet. So it's about half the cabinet.
That's everybody making a bid, I guess.
Everyone comes and makes a bid, and we do the best we can to kind of make it all add up, make it fit, and make it work. So those kind of those groups are probably the most influential groups, but obviously in every group, the Prime Minister is going to be the most influential voice.
So here's a captain's call.
Yeah, but he to his credit, he would be one of the leaders in my lifetime who's been least reliant on the kind of my way or the highway. His strength comes from the way that he utilizes the team. And whether you're in football or business or all kinds of walks of life, there are different kinds of leaders. And Anthony draws strength from the collective. And that makes him a little bit unusual, but I think makes him more effective. And as a senior minister in his government, and the others say this too, we talk about it all the time, we're very lucky because he's less of a my way or the highway guy than what other leaders might have been. Certainly his predecessor, Scott Morrison, was a very centralising figure, I think to his detriment. And Anthony's got a much more collegiate way of running the show.
So, and that's Anthony. If I, because one of the things I remember happened, and I noticed you're completely different to your predecessor. So that is Chris Bowen as Shadow Treasurer. Jim Chalmers is completely different in lots of ways. Well, you're all unique, but in lots of ways. But one of the things, this is my own personal theory, but one of the things I think that was really made it tough for Bill in that election period was Chris Bowen's view on franking credits and negative gearing. And and they're big policy changes. And by the way, I will say up front, I have criticised negative gearing as an economic policy.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that it's here, I would criticise changing it because it's too embedded in the Australian system.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from being politically diabolical if you do propose a change of that. And I actually think that those big calls, those sort of thing Trump does, but those big calls in Australia at least are really tough, hard to make. And I see you play a much more, I'm not going to say safe game, but much straighter down the line game. Do you, though, at any point in your career say, you know what, there's one thing I really hate about the economy that needs to be fixed because it's unfair, for whatever the reason, it's unfair. Do you ever get to that point where you just want to do it, or you just have to keep looking back at what the polls say, looking what your consumers want, looking about what your audience wants, looking back what your voters want, looking back what Australians want? They got you there. We saw Dutton do it today. Dutton wheel back on the 5 days of work, go back to work type of thing.
Yeah.
Is Australia different to other places in the world, or is it because no one actually gets a really big mandate to make these changes?
I think we are making some big changes. You know, the energy transformation is a big change. Some of the ways that we've repaired the budget have been big shifts.
I'm talking about when an individual can actually see how that will actually affect me.
Yeah, I understand.
Not the other transformative stuff, not the economic policy transformative stuff. I'm talking about when people go, wow, that's going to affect me.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose my negative gearing, whatever.
Well, I think the closest we've come to a big gutsy call that has changed people's prospects is when we decided we were going to rewrite the stage 3 income tax cuts.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of grief politically, but we knew it was the right thing to do. And it turned out well for us. People broadly supported the changes we were making. So that required some courage, and it had a direct impact on people.
Because I was going to ask you, that's where I'm getting to. I'm going to say, because your person, that person who inspired you when you were 16, 17, 18, one of the things he would have inspired you would have been one of the things he would have said to you if he was here today. He'd probably say, "Jim, be courageous."
Yeah, well, he does.
But just because you're not courageous, and what I'm trying to get to here is sometimes we got to listen to what the people are saying.
Yeah. Well, I think every decision you make in government, you have to work out, can I bring the people with us on this? Yeah. And I think that gets harder and harder. The media environment's a bit more fraught. That's not an excuse, but it's a reality.
It's a reality.
And so, Paul's well known for his public advice, and his private advice to us is to do more and to do it quicker. And often that's my instinct too. But my belief is that Australians, they don't like big things done quickly. They don't like little things done slowly, but they'll cop big things done slowly or big things done methodically in a considered way. And so that's the space I like to operate in. So energy, some of the tax changes, some of the ways we improve the budget. That's I think that's how you get things done in this country now. But I say that as an admirer of Paul had a bit more of a crash through or crash style with some of these big reforms, and they paid off magnificently for Australia. But I think what we are doing basically is we are reformers, but we're not revolutionaries. And everything that we do, you have to make the case over a period of time so that you can bring the people with you.
And that's very interesting that you said that about Paul Keating. Would it have any? Do you think how much of that though relies on back in those days, and also under the Howard period, bigger mandates, like a bigger majority, as opposed to having to lean back into the other parties?
Yeah, I think politics is more fragmented now.
Yeah,
and
it didn't have a Teal, for example, in those days.
Yeah, and they had the beginnings of the Democrats, but broadly there was a kind of a more robust two-party system.
Yeah.
And it wasn't quite winner take all. You still needed the Senate on things, but it was more winner takes all than it is now. And the media environment is much more fragmented now. And so the operating environment's very different. But none of that is a sort of a we are making good progress despite the fragmentation of our politics, and it's one of the many ways that our politics is different now to the politics of Paul's day, as successful as he was.
Yeah, it's he was successful, and it's hard to sort of base yourself upon him other than sentiment, in a sentiment way only, perhaps. And because people say, "Oh, governments lack courage." Governments don't lack courage. Governments lack mandates, and it's easy to say someone's not being very courageous if all that's going to happen is they're just going to get yelled at and pushed down and lose an election, which means they can't ever do anything if they lose an election. It's all about, let me get in there first and let me see what I can do after that.
Yeah.
I mean, and you can be then criticized as not being courageous enough. And for someone from where you come from, growing up with how you grew up, probably one of the worst things, and you're a Queenslander too, is someone to say, the worst thing is for you to be confronted with is for someone to think that you don't have courage. Because courage means you don't have any conviction. If you don't have courage, you don't have conviction. And it seems to me that that's something that you put a lot of weight on, your conviction.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And therefore you must have courage. It must be frustrating for you though.
Well, I think we're making more change than people give us credit for. And what we're doing to transform the way that our economy is powered, cleaner and cheaper, more reliable energy, that takes courage. Some of the decisions we've taken in the budget, some of the decisions we've taken in economic reform, competition policy, that has been courageous. But what we've tried to do is to do it in a considered, methodical way where we make the case and try and bring people with us. Because as you rightly say, you can have all of the courage in the world if you don't win and get re-elected, then you're no use to anyone.
It's a waste of time. Prime Minister, probably much to his regret in some respects, bought a place up on the Central Coast, and he's going to get married sometime this year, I think. Perhaps. Good luck to him, and I congratulate him on that. If he says, mate, that was a tough period, glad we won, we're in a minority government though, hanging out with the Greens or whoever you have to hang out with, I don't know, whoever you got to hang out with, I'm out. I think Australians would like to know this. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm just want to hang out with Jodie and just live my life way up there. Here, available for you whenever you want to talk to me. Would you put your hat in the ring?
I can't see that situation happening.
Come on, Jim.
No, I can't see it happening.
No, but I'm just saying, because I'm trying to work out, you said something very interesting before. You got to be, as Paul Keating said, you got to be prepared to exercise power.
Mm-hmm.
And the ultimate power here is the PM. As you said, that's how your caucus works.
Yeah.
Could we be looking at the next Prime Minister at some stage?
I think the best way to think about it, or the way that I think about it, is if you had said to me in that period we're thinking about, knocking around Logan City as a teenager, that you get the opportunity to be the Treasurer of Australia, the job that Paul did.
Very cool.
Then I'm really happy with that. I mean, I genuinely am. From time to time, someone will ask me a question like the one that you just asked me, but my preference, my expectation is that we win the election, that Anthony's the Prime Minister all the way through, and that I get to be the Treasurer, because you have to have the humility that says, where can I make the best contribution to this team? That our best team, the best team that we can put on the park is Anthony as PM, the other colleagues where they are, and I think I'm making a good contribution as Treasurer, and so I would happily keep doing that. If you and I hung out on my back deck in 20 or 30 years' time,
I won't smoke a cigar because Treasurers
can't do that.
It doesn't go too well.
No, but if we had a cup of tea on the back deck in 20 or 30 years' time, and I had been the Treasurer for a couple of terms, I would be very, very happy with that. Very happy with that.
And I think that's a fair answer. But, I reckon Richo would be pretty happy if you became the Prime Minister.
Well, Richo is a big supporter of Anthony's.
Absolutely.
Very big supporter of Anthony's.
But he's also a big supporter of yours. Yeah. I asked for you to give me 4 questions for your counterpart in the Liberal Party, Angus, which I asked him, and he's got some questions for you. 4 questions.
Great.
Ready? And by the way, these are without notice. He doesn't know what the questions are. In fact, I only saw the question myself this morning. So question number 1, he said, you've said in the past that 6 long months in the private sector convinced you that your efforts were best spent in public policy. Can you explain why you decided that and what you didn't like about the private sector?
Well, first of all, I do like the private sector, and I respect and admire the people who create the wealth and the opportunities and the jobs in our society. I'm a huge admirer of the risk takers and the wealth creators. For me, I have always wanted to work for the country. And for as long as I can remember, as far back as you and I have talked about today, the idea that I get to work on the economy in a way that is for everyone in Australia rather than in an individual enterprise, that's always been appealing to me. And I understand, to be fair to Angus, to be charitable to Angus, everyone makes different decisions and about where they can make the best contribution. But for me, I think the best contribution I can make is the one that I'm making, and I can do that respecting the immense primary role that the private sector plays in our economy.
Angus's second question is, small businesses after the last 3 years have copped it. Energy bills are up, wage bills have gone up through your industrial relations.
These are all the questions that Angus was desperately hoping to ask me in question time, but Peter Dutton wouldn't let him ask.
The migration reforms, and now they've got less tax incentives than they did in 2022. The ATO is also on their back. If they have a loan, there is a 1 in 2 chance it is secure against a house, which definitely if we lend them the money, they'll have to put the house up for security.
Right.
And that is before you factor in interest rates. If you were running a small business today,
yes,
Treasurer, facing those challenges, where would you start to make a profit?
Yeah.
I like to know the answers. I wish I knew the answers.
I won't come at every part of that. I mean,
much.
For example, do you know there's been 25,000 new businesses created on average every month, the life of this government, the most ever. And so people have got a downbeat view about small business because the conditions have genuinely been difficult, but there's also been more businesses created under us than under any government. And so I don't like the sense that is implicit in Angus's question that small businesses should be pessimistic. I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And if you think about how new small businesses create jobs and opportunities and wealth, there's been an explosion in the services sector, online retailing. There is so much about the way that our economy is changing and our industrial base is changing that creates huge opportunities for small business. And so I know that conditions have been difficult. Inflation has come down, but it has been difficult. Some of the other global and domestic pressures on small businesses have been substantial, but I have a glass half full approach to small business. I know how much wealth and opportunity they create in our economy, and we've been supporting them, energy bill rebates, competition reforms, a whole bunch of ways, instant asset write-off tax breaks, because we believe in small business. And I think we wouldn't be creating so many businesses per month if people didn't share at least a little bit of a sense of optimism about the future. And
he said, do you ever second guess if you got it right, that if you'd been more disciplined on government spending after the pandemic, we may have had lower inflation and faster interest rates cuts? I mean, some people might say that the government spending during the pandemic, which it wasn't you guys, was pretty tough too. But anyway, do you ever second guess if you got it right? In other words, I think what he's sort of saying is, do you ever think to yourself, maybe I made a mistake?
Well, I think we got the balance right. You'd expect me to say that. I think we got the balance right. But to play through to its logical conclusion, the view that Angus has, Angus wanted us to kind of slash and burn in the budget because there's a view out there, which I think is wrong, that the best way to deal with inflation is to have a kind of a hard landing and then clean up afterwards. Whereas what we've been able to engineer, not just the government, we as in Australians, have business and workers and everyone, is we've got inflation down without sacrificing a heap of jobs, with wages growing again, growth rebounding, interest rates are coming down. So that combination is historically unusual and it's unusual around the world, and that's because we got this balance broadly right. And so, I'm not the sort of person that pretends that, every single thing we get perfectly right. But in terms of that balance, I think Australians collectively have got that balance right, because if we'd gone down the path that is implicit in Angus's question, we would have had a recession. We'd be cleaning up after a recession. Unemployment would be higher and people would be worse off.
And his final question is, we hear a lot from politicians about what they want to talk about or boast about. I'm interested particularly in the current economic context. I guess he's talking about today. Is there anything you've got wrong in the last 3 years? That's his last question.
Oh, look, I think it comes back to what we were talking about before, and that is, I feel broadly that the government's got the decisions right and the balances right. From time to time, I am a very blunt communicator, and sometimes the situation requires a bit more nuance. And so if I think about the things where I've reflected on how I would do things differently, it's to recognise that this microphone in front of this treasurer, but every treasurer, is a powerful thing. And so to make sure that when I'm being upfront with people and frank with people and blunt about the situation, to make sure that I choose my words carefully. And really that's the main thing that I, from time to time, I think I could have described that situation differently. But in terms of the decisions we've taken, I'm very proud of them.
Well, someone said to me this morning, a very well-known commentator, and I won't raise his name because he probably doesn't want to be named, but I told him I was seeing you today, and he said to me, Jim is very polished. I'm just watching you today. I mean, you're very good on your feet, and you're only, relatively speaking, young man from my point of view anyway.
I look a lot older than I did 3 years ago.
Yeah, well, good. Being the treasurer will do that, mate. But he said you're very polished in delivery. Were you always good at speaking publicly, like debate? Was there something that come out of your family or at school?
No, and one of the things I would have done differently when I was a kid is I would have done debating, or I would have been, less shy, in my 20s, in my political involvement. I think if you want to make a difference and a contribution, you've got to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And for me, the public element of it, being on TV and giving speeches, that's something that I've had to learn over time. But what I have tried to do is I've tried to take complex things and make them easier for people to understand for all the reasons we've been talking about today. It's one of the things I enjoy is kind of interpreting. Being the treasurer is being the explainer in chief on lots of occasions. And so I take that part of the job very seriously. I don't think I'd like to be more polished. There are much more polished communicators even in our own team. But I relish the opportunity to explain things to people. And I think that comes across. I think people know that I'm trying to be upfront with them about what's happening and what we're grappling with and what we're trying to do about it. And I don't think that's polish. I just think that it's a part of my role that I value, and I hope that comes across.
I think when he meant polished, he sort of said to me that Jim is able to sell the policy, sell the concept. Like, I don't mean in a salesmanship way, but actually express it in a way that everyone can understand and can maybe even relate to, perhaps. And I wonder if that has something to do with where you grew up, the people you hung out with, it's how you had to live your life.
It's funny you say this because there is I don't know if it's the same one, but there's a commentator that I've discussed with before and Jack, who's here on your couch here, we talk about it frequently because he's got the same mannerisms. And that is, when you pick up colloquialisms and the way that people spoke maybe in the 80s and the 90s. And for me, when I was a little fella, I used to talk my dad into taking me to the races on Saturday, and I'd wander around the public bar with a Hessian bag and collect cans and stubbies to recycle for money when I was kind of 12, 13. And only quite recently, speaking to a couple of people, it's dawned on me that maybe some of the ways that I speak is because in my formative years, I would spend 3 or 4 hours wandering around the bar at Doomben or Eagle Farm in Brisbane at the races. My dad loves the horses. collecting cans, and I got to know some of these blokes in the bar at the races, and I wonder if sometimes when I slip into that kind of old school colloquialism, I wonder if it's from dragging a Hessian sack around the public bar at the races where I've got that from.
Well, because I think of, as us as voters, particularly at this critical time at the moment, we've got a global drama going on, and we also we're in the middle of election. We've got to know, we want to feel comfortable who we're going to vote in, that you can get us through this process. We want to make sure we can understand the person's talking to us. We don't want to be getting gobbledygook. We don't want to be getting technical bullshit such that we all walk away scratching our head and haven't got a clue. In fact, we're more clueless after the conversation than we were before the conversation. I think this particular guy that he's talking to me this morning about, I think that's what he's getting at, that you have the ability to sort of decipher it for us.
Yeah, but I think the important thing there is not talking down to people.
No.
And talking up to people.
Yeah.
And so, when we've got something complex to explain, a new policy or a big development in the economy like today, I try and remember that the job here is to talk up to people, not talk down to people. And so to explain things in simple language, but to recognize that people are pretty smart. People are smart, and they can work out if you're trying to snow them with unnecessary detail. And so sometimes the most important thing is to be able to simplify something but not dumb it down.
So how does a kid from Logan City feel about where he is today?
Well, I think it's an especially important time to have a big job like this. And, when you're on planes a lot and you're away from your family a lot, you try and make sure that you are still grateful for the opportunity, because the opportunity is fleeting. Even if you get to do this job for a long time, Paul got to do it for 8.5 years. Swanee got to do it for almost 6 years. Costello for must have been 11 years. But mostly people who get a shorter time frame than that. Do you recognise that these opportunities are fleeting, and so do the best you can. And to recognise that at some point it will be over, and whether it's at the election or at some subsequent point. And so with the election imminent, I feel really grateful for the chance, and I desperately want to do it for longer, but to recognise how fortunate I am to be able to do a job like this at a time when the world's going mad, and where the big task for Australia is to work out how do we make our people beneficiaries of all of this churn and change rather than victims of it. If you accept that when the world's going mad and there's a lot of change, there are kind of three schools of thought: let it rip, turn back the clock, or try and make sure that people fare well amongst all of this churn and change. Really, that's where I'm at. And so especially grateful for the chance to do this job in an uncertain time.
Yeah, so sort of what you're saying is, I was just thinking about that. That's like a gift, the ability to, or the vote to navigate your way through as a treasurer, as a person who loves doing these things.
Yeah.
Navigate yourself, the country through yourself, the country through this really tough, complicated and very unusual. Never before have we seen something like this. Just like COVID never saw before.
Yeah.
Just like GFC never saw before.
Yeah.
This is something we've never seen before.
Right.
And it's a gift to be able to take us through that. Final question. Why should Australians who are listening to the show right now vote Labor?
Well, because we've made a lot of progress together the last 3 years, but the job's not done because people are under pressure and the global environment's very uncertain. And so it's a pretty simple choice, we believe. We are helping with the cost of living, cutting income taxes, strengthening Medicare, making our economy more resilient. And the other guys are for lower wages and higher taxes, and they've got these secret cuts to pay for their nuclear reactors. And so I think the closer we get to the election, that choice crystallises, and it's a pretty stark choice. And we've tried to help people with the cost of living throughout this inflation challenge. We've done that despite our opponents, not with their support. And so I think we are better placed to help people navigate what's going to be a pretty tricky and uncertain time in the global economy.
Well, good luck, and if you guys get through it, and I imagine you're going to be the treasurer still. What an amazing opportunity!
That's right. That's it. You think about De La Salle and the school that I went to, I think they instill on you this idea that it's good to be counted on.
Yeah.
You want to be counted on. There's this sense of service. And I feel that every day, grateful for that every single day. But I think especially as you get closer to the election, you recognise how rare and cherished this opportunity is to help run the country, best country on earth, and to have a say in how it's run is a pretty remarkable thing. And so I appreciate it, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you today.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers, thanks very much.
Thanks, mate.